Okay, so what I want to talk about now, though, is the question of does corruption matter from an economic perspective? Okay, and clearly I want to put aside, let's sort of bracket for the moment ethical issues of we think corruption is sort of is bad ethically. Let's put aside the fact that sort of having kind of this bad moral example may lead to other kinds of bad moral behavior in society, all of which I think are potentially real things. But we just want to think of this from a sort of a economic analysis perspective, sort of what's the impact of corruption on sort of economic efficiency. Okay, so someone said before, you raised the idea that corruption might be bad for economic outcomes. So what was your thinking behind why that would be? Right. So why do you think corruption might be bad for economic performance? Why do you think it might be bad for growth?
Oh, I mentioned that it might lower productivity. That's kind of a catch-all term, isn't it?
Right, so exactly. So why?
It might, say, incentivize people to find a job, like a bureaucratic job where they can kind of just skim the fat corruptly and not actually produce anything valuable to the economy.
Right, so there's a great paper that makes exactly that point called The Economic Theory of the Rent-Seeking Society by Ann Kruger, which is exactly about that point. It basically says, look, there's all this kind of corrupt money to steal. Instead of you guys going off to Google or whatever to invent new exciting technologies, which is like improving productivity, you could basically spend your time going to steal money from each other, which would be personally profitable, but have no overall impact on economic growth. Right, so that's one theory. What are some other theories?
I imagine there's like a hit to investment, in particular.
Right. So why might investment go down?
It's really costly or difficult to get building permits. I'm not going to go through the trouble or the risk of bribing an official to get those permits.
Right. So it might exactly. So getting official government permission would become harder, and therefore I might do less of it.
It probably has larger effects on like the fabric of society. If people feel like nobody else is following the rules and they don't want to follow the rules.
Exactly. That was sort of I totally agree with that. That was sort of the moral kind of ethical leadership example I was trying to sort of bracket. But I agree with you. That it could be a real issue. What are some other reasons?
Things like government contracts, like the most efficient bid isn't going to win because it might go to somebody who pays a higher price.
Right. Exactly. So that's.
You're not picking the most.
Right. You might be some contractor who's like really efficient at delivering a road, but they don't get the contract. Someone else paid a higher bribe. Do you think that's likely to happen? Who do you think is in procurement? You're saying yes. Is there a reason why actually corruption might get why the right person might win anyway?
Because if you assume like everybody's paying some standard-based bribe, then like the difference in their overall cost is their productivity.
Right. So exactly. So if the bribe is the same, then the price is going to be lower for the more productive guys. What if the bribe can adjust? Who's going to be willing to pay more in a bribe? Huh? Potentially, right? So the more successful person might be willing to pay more in a bribe. So in some sense, if you have an auction that basically says, look, I'm going to award it to the person who has the combination of lowest cost plus highest bribe, the person who can do that is the most efficient contractor because they have the most surplus from winning the bid. So that's an example where corruption transfers a lot of money from the the government to sort of these corrupt officials in terms of kickbacks, and so it might be transferring a lot of rents around, but it might still be the case that the more efficient person wins the contract. So we don't know. Like that's actually an empirical question. Yeah.
Just from living in a very corrupt country, it's usually the person who is the most dishonest that gets the contract.
What?
It's usually the person who's the most dishonest.
Right. So yes. So exactly. So my example assumed that everyone was equally dishonest, and if I'm going to agree with you. So if everyone is equally dishonest, right, then the theory I was just saying that the person who's going to pay the highest bribe is going to be the most efficient person. But if you introduce that there's some dishonest people and some honest people, and you think that the honest people are sometimes the most efficient, then they might lose to the dishonest, less efficient person, and then you would get a distortion. So I think it's absolutely possible, and I think it depends. I don't think it's obvious what's going to happen. Why might corruption be good?
So if we think that the state has particular particularly bad policy or particularly bad institutions, maybe subverting the state is not the worst thing.
Right. So that's an okay. So I know you seem very hesitant to make that argument. Maybe I'm hesitant to make that argument on camera too. But right. So the argument was that maybe if the state is doing really bad things, that actually we might want to be able to sort of smooth that out with corruption. And this is the idea that corruption greases the wheels of the system. Right. So this is not a totally like out of left field idea. So Samuel Huntington, who was a very well-known political scientist at Harvard, sort of famously argued this was correct, that actually sort of on net corruption was good. It sort of greased the wheels of the system, and if you got rid of corruption, you could end up with sort of total gridlock. Right? Now, of course, one kind of rejoinder to that is, yes, corruption greases the wheels of the system, but maybe those like the wheels that need to be greased are only there as a way to get you to pay bribes. Right? And so it may be that if we cut down on corruption, all of a sudden the system would be in gridlock kind of in the short run. But at some level, the only reason for that is because they put all those obstacles in place only to get bribes from you to begin with. Right? So we don't exactly know. So let me just put out a little bit of a theory to help think through kind of what these different types of corruption might mean. And then I'll talk about empirically a kind of interesting paper that tried to think through some of these issues. Okay.